Hi, hello, I'm Dr. Gil Zukerman, and I'm going to talk about two studies we done on Ariel University. We're talking about studies that tried to examine the adaptation, the social and the academic adaptation of adult students with ASD to the university, to study university. Now I'm going to talk about all the ASD students that I'm going to talk about are part of an integration program that is held in the university. The integration program gives some kind of a social support. It gives help with university procedures, but does not give any help with academic charts. I'm going to talk about two time frames. The first study I'm going to exhibit is a study that was done on the first time frame, on the first semester, on the first years of those students, roughly about 60 students with ASD. And the second study is a longitudinal study that talks about 2 periods of time: first year, first semester; second year, first semester. Okay? But first, a few words about outcome in adults, ASD. And we know there's a need for adult-focused research in ASD. And though part of the ASD population are what is defined as high-functioning ASD, there's a poor outcome reporting generally about adults with ASD. High frequency of unemployment, as well as social and academic dependence, are also reported by studies that examine cognitively able participants with ASD. Now, among the ASD population, there are high levels of psychiatric comorbidities. And basically, we talk about depressive symptoms, anxiety disorders, ADHD, attention deficit disorders, and obsessive compulsive disorders, which are also part of the syndrome itself. Few words about post-secondary education and ASD. We all know that post-secondary education has positive outcomes. There are estimated that about 50,000 students with ASD graduate every year from high school in the USA. About a third of them will attend college. However, there's very scarce research regarding the adaptation of such students or such people to study in the university. Previous reports have mainly focused on subjective experience of college students with ASD, reported on high levels of loneliness, depression, isolation, and there were also inconclusive findings regarding academic achievement. Now, our study in Ariel examined the adaptation of and the adaptive behavior of 60 first-degree bachelor students with ASD attending the integration program. All of the students were diagnosed with ASD by a licensed neurologist or psychiatrist, and all had a score of 32 or more on the autism quotient treatment. Okay. Now,
I'm sorry, what was the measure? They had a score of 32 or more.
30 more on the autism spectrum quotient. Okay. And 75% of them choose to study exact sciences, which is typical to those students, and only 25% chose to study social sciences. Now, let me talk first about the first time, meaning first year, first semester, and we try to understand whether there are associations between different variables, like, for example, adaptive behavior and psychiatric comorbidities among this population. Adaptive behavior in this study was measured by the ABAS. The ABAS provides a norm reference standard score, like the Wechsler, with an average of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. Adaptive behaviors are a set of behaviors which are very essential to everyday living, that includes communication abilities, social skills, and so forth. Our aim was to compare adaptive functioning and psychiatric comorbidities between students with and without ASD, and to look for predictors of adaptive behavior in the student population, and in particular in this particular subpopulation of students with ASD. This is the first year, first semester, and the comparison of students with ASD to typically what is called typically developing students. So what we had in the first sample were 95 participants. 55 out of them were students with ASD, 47 were non-ASD. We used the Leibovitz social anxiety scale, which is a scale to measure social anxiety. We choose also the state-right anxiety inventory in order to study state and situational anxiety, the Y-box in order to study obsessive-compulsive symptoms among this population, and the Beck depression inventory for studying depression, whether there are depression symptoms. And of course, there were significant differences in adaptive behavior between the groups. As you can see, the non-ASD group showed a regular, about 197 point something average way of dealing with adaptive behavior, and the ASD group was much lower in the range of average to low scale. So there's a great difference between those two populations. And also there's a great difference in psychiatric comorbidities, or this is not a psychiatric diagnosis, but in the level of psychiatric comorbidities. As you can see, there are differences in all the indices, but if we're talking clinically, then you can see that in the Y-box, which is a tool to study obsessive-compulsive symptoms, the ASD group has above 13, which is considered mild OCD, but they have a very high level of social anxiety. The cutoff score for social anxiety in this scale is 35, so they're beyond this score. This is a group which is characterized by very high levels of social anxiety, something that we didn't thought before we did this research. We also did a regression analysis in order to understand what will predict the variance in adaptive behavior, and we saw that the group affiliation, of course, meaning if you had or you didn't a diagnosis of ASD, the sex, and the level of social anxiety predicted adaptive behavior to a large amount of variance, but there was no interaction, meaning that if you have social anxiety, then you have less adaptive behavior, but this is not specific only to people with ASD. So our conclusion were that compared to students without ASD, adaptive behavior was significantly lower in the ASD group, even among this subpopulation that came to university, that study in the university, what is called cognitively abled ASD. Students with ASD exhibit high levels of social anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorder, but if we talk about the BDI, they didn't have very high levels of depression. You can see that the ASD group is about 11 and the cutoff point is 13. And this is in contrary to previous research. In our program, students with ASD did not report very high levels of depression. They did report some kind of depression, but not very high. And as you can see, as I will talk later, this level of depression even went down through the years. And social anxiety symptoms significantly explain the variance in adaptive behavior among university students, but no specific association between the social anxiety and adaptive behavior was evident among students with ASD. No interaction found. Okay, so this was the first study. And the second study is a longitudinal study. We took the same sample of ASD students. We tried to persuade them to come in the second year, which was very, very, very hard. And we try to understand whether studying in the university or being in a university would have any impact on either adaptive behavior or either psychiatric comorbidities. Now, though the portion of students with ASD has grown rapidly in last year, there's a paucity of longitudinal research regarding their adaptation to university. Now, for this research, we had 39 students with ASD. This is what we could achieve. It's very hard to persuade students with ASD to come and answer questionnaires. We had 29 students with no ASD but with high social anxiety, because we wanted to compare the ASD students with other students who don't have ASD but has high social anxiety, meaning beyond 35 on the Leibovitz social anxiety scale, and 31 control students with no ASD and no social anxiety. The measures we had then were the three subcomponents of the ABAS, sub-composite scores, which relate to a conceptual composite score, meaning the ability for communication, what is called functional academics and self-direction, social composite score, meaning social and leisure time, and practical composite score, self-care, home living, community use, and health and safety. Now, we also studied psychiatric comorbidities by the same tools that we used for the first time. And our aim of the study was to study the possible effects of post-secondary education, attending university. I remind you that all the people, all the ASD group was in a kind of an integration program, they were not alone, and to compare them to other people with no ASD. Now, this graph shows the changes or group differences in ABAS conceptual composite scores. As you can see, for all groups, there's some kind of improvement through time, and there's a significant interaction, meaning what we want to say is that there is some kind of improvement, but the improvement is only significant and very significant among the ASD group. Basically, if we're talking about grades in the ABAS, then 80 is about percentile 9, and 92 is about percentile 35, if I remember, or 32. So there's a marked decrease in adaptive behavior among this population when they study in the university. Whether it's connected to study in the university or not, I don't know. But these are the results, okay? This is in the conceptual composite score, which refers more to the ability to understand the academic requirements, to study well, to be organized, okay? And there is also a change, a marginally significant interaction in the social domain, okay? This is the ABAS social composite score, and again, you can see that there's some kind of an improvement for those students, but again, the improvement is only on the ASD group. Meaning that being in the university did something for those people. There was no change in the last composite score, which is the practical composite score. We don't know really why. Regarding psychiatric comorbidities, there were no changes in all the psychiatric comorbidities, meaning there were no changes in anxiety, no changes in obsessive-compulsive symptoms, but there was a very drastic change in the level of depression that those students talk about. In the first year, we're talking about something like 10, 13, and in the second year, it went down roughly equivalent to the other groups. So the conclusion were that students with ASD have reported on a significant improvement in adaptive behavior from first to second year in post-secondary education in both conceptual and social domain, percentile 9 to percentile 30 and 23 respectively, pointing on a more adaptation in the areas of communication, functional academic, and social functioning. Second-year reports were marked by a significant reduction, 50% in depressive symptoms among students with ASD, though in both years depression levels did not reach clinical threshold. As a group, students with ASD were characterized by high level of social anxiety and obsessive-compulsive symptoms, but those indices were not reduced along with time in the university. And maybe that's because anxiety is more related to the core symptoms of ASD and depression is not. I don't know. But those are the results. I have more time? 5 minutes. So in the last 5 minutes, I want to show you another research that we have done. We also tried on the first time frame to study whether there is a connection between social anxiety and academic achievement. And there is scarce research on academic achievement among students with ASD, and no research on the possible association between psychiatric comorbidities and grades among those people, special interest in the effect of social anxiety, and I want to show you why. Because social networks were connected with higher grades on the university. It was hypothesized that when you have a larger social network, meaning more friends, you know more people, then you get either psychological gains, you can have social and emotional support, and you can get also instrumental gains, participating in collaborative learning and so forth. So we wanted to know, the hypothesis was that if you have among typically developing, when you have low social anxiety, you have a large social network, more resources, and maybe higher grades. When you have high social anxiety, it means that you tend to avoid from social interaction. You have small social networks, less resources, and less grades, or less lower academic achievement. So what we wanted to do is compare students with ASD to typically developing students with either high or low levels of social anxiety. And to do this, we took the academic achievement, the grade point average in a university students with ASD and with or without ASD, but with high and low social anxiety. And we wanted to evaluate the association between academic achievement and anxiety. What we had there was 111 participants. This is, again, grades from first year, first semester, okay? ASD group was 55 individual. We had another group of high social anxiety students, 31, I think, and control typically developed students. 75 of all the samples choose to study exact sciences, 25 social sciences. There were no significant group differences in course affiliation between the groups because we wanted them to be in similar academic departments. We used the autism spectrum quotient, the Leibovitz social anxiety scale, the state right anxiety inventory, the Y-box, the L-Brown, in order to study obsessive compulsive systems, and the Beck depression inventory. And we had GPAs from the first semester of the current academic year obtained from the official university-generated report. And there were, of course, significant differences in GPA between the group. As you can see, the control group has the higher GPA. The social anxiety has somewhat lower GPA, but no significant differences, no significant statistical differences. And there were, of course, significant differences between the ASD group and the control group, okay? You can see here significant difference in level of autistic triads, the AQ, significant differences in anxiety. And what is more interesting is when we tried to calculate the correlation between social anxiety and GPA, the correlation was diametrically opposed between ASD students and non-ASD students. For non-ASD students, there was a significant negative correlation between social anxiety and grades. If you had high social anxiety, you had lower grades. However, for ASD students, for students with ASD, the correlation was significantly positive. And what we thought, what was our explanation, just going on by the time, is when you have ASD, learning with other people, associating with other people, maybe makes you more anxious. And when you're more anxious, then your grades are lower. Thank you.